Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. This is game 3 of the final round match between Magnus Carlsen and Rameshbabu Praggnanandhaa. And the first 2 games were drawn. You might have seen my first video on game 2. Those first 2 games, very nervy from both players. Carlsen let slip big advantage in game 2. Pragg was better in game 1. Carlsen was also better, fluctuating struggle. So anyway, this is game 3. Carlsen with white. Interesting, he's playing safe and sound. A Catalan with white. Pragg goes for bishop d7, not one of the main lines, but it's well motivated. This bishop wants to come out to the long diagonal to meet the bishop on g2. But I think Carlsen realizes that Pragg is a very tricky customer. He is so sharp. Well, Carlsen has lost to him already in rapid play games, and I think Carlsen wants to keep a pretty steady ship basically, and that's why he's playing the solid Catalan as white. And this is such a typical Catalan. The D and C pawns disappear, but white tries to keep some kind of positional advantage. And, well, we're about to see white certainly has that advantage. Here, the advantage is basically that white is ahead in development. Yes, black has recovered the C pawn, and this bishop is very well placed on d5. It's come out from c8. That's often the problem for black in the Catalan. But this is pleasant for white because, if black tries to simplify again, white is gaining time by attacking the bishop. So, that's why the bishop was removed to c6 by Pragg. But still, this is fun for white. White has castled. In effect, white is starting the middle game already, whereas for black it's not so simple because the king is still in the middle. Rook d1 is a good move. There's certainly no need to exchange because that would help black to develop. So why not put a rook on the d file? It's nice. Pragg exchanges and plays queen c6 check. f3. And then he exchanges. Oh, it's a little finesse. Do you want the pawn here or f2? Well, I don't think it makes a huge difference. But I think Carlsen would have been very happy with the outcome of this opening. He's ahead in development. It's as simple as that. What does Pragg do about the rooks stuck in the corners? He would like to castle, but when he castles, that leaves the d7 square potentially available. Yes, I know there's a knight looking at d7. But this is the problem with these kind of positions in the Catalan for black. Already there's a potential threat to come to b5 and in here, so that's why a6 was played, but that's a little chink in the armour. b6 is now vulnerable, and Carlsen goes for it straight away, knight a4. Bishop e7, of course, that would instantly solve black's problems. Rooks connected, king in the middle, covering important squares. Of course you don't exchange. Bishop f4, attacking the knight, gaining time. And knight b6, rook d8. Well, the rooks are still not connected, but of course, exchanging pieces helps. Bishop c7, forcing exchange. And again, Pragg has a problem. If the king castles, then the rook will come down to d7. That's why bishop c5 was played. And, potentially he wants to exchange off here. Potentially king e7 is a move that would certainly, in this particular position, that would solve all black's problems because the rook would be able to come into play. So Carlsen plays knight c8 It's not clear that that's the best move, actually. He could have played knight here and then just brought the bishop back to b6, and still a slightly sticky situation for black, where castling would allow... Is castling still legal? I think it is. Yeah, castling is still legal. Castling would allow rook d7. It's unpleasant. So black still has an equalize there. But I think Carlsen rushed it a little bit with knight c8. Bishop b6. And now castles. Well, you can see that if rook takes knight is threatened. You know, this is the problem. So bishop takes, rook takes, and Carlsen has to be a little bit careful here. Well, let's just look at rook d7. I mean, this would allow knight e5, attacking these two. Rook d6 played. That's an interesting move. I mean, black is so close to equalizing here, but Carlsen still finds a way to cause trouble. Incidentally, if bishop b6 looks like the obvious move to control d8, and yeah, then rook d7 is threatened. But watch what happens. Knight b4 is a nice move. And if a3, then knight d5 hits the bishop, supported by the pawn, of course. Rook c2, well, black is definitely not worse there. That looks pretty good. So knight b4 is actually a very nice move. Opening up the c-file, threatening here, looking at knight d5 as well. And that's why rook d6 was played. Because if e5, bishop b6, and you'll notice with knight b4 that's a very different situation, because after a3, well, the knight simply hasn't got the anchor, hasn't got the support from e6, and then white again is in control. So here Pragg played an excellent move. Rook d8. He needs activity. Now the exchange of rooks, well, that's just an equal position. So Carlsen takes, rook d2. Excellent compensation for the pawn. The rook activates, the king comes out. Carlsen's rook can't get to the 7th rank. It has to come back. But you can see these pieces are now very awkwardly placed. Yes, Carlsen has won a pawn, but poorly coordinated. Black is very well coordinated. And here, actually, well, Pragg plays what looks like a very normal move. He plays f5 to push that rook even further away. In fact, rook d1 is a good move here. The rook can't go anywhere anyway. And rook a1 is threatened. And, well, black is absolutely fine in that position. No difficulties at all. Remember, this is rapid play, so I'm not kind of pointing fingers in any way. In fact, I have to say that, you know, because of that, this game is surprisingly accurate. You know, no one was blundering anything, basically. Still not an easy position for white to you know, make something of this pawn. If rook c2, then the king wanders across, and, well, that would force a rook exchange. So the rook has to go back, and clearly Carlsen has made progress there. Now he needs to free his rook. That's why g4 was played. And if g6, then that can be exchanged, and rook h4. And yeah, rook h6 or rook takes pawn looks good. So g5. You know, this is very tricky stuff, actually. Rook takes pawn. yeah, then, well, let me see. Knight, oh no, of course, b4. What am I talking about? Yeah, b4 traps the bishop. So pawn takes pawn check. Now the rook is attacked, has to keep on the fourth rank. My brain went blank for a moment. Rook e4 to stop b4, and king takes pawn. So Carlsen is a pawn up and has some kind of control now. Certainly stability. You know, these pieces look far better than a few moves ago when they were split up. He has some coordination, and now he starts to make something of this extra pawn. Of course, every exchange is desirable for Carlsen. Just needs to relieve some of the pressure. So now we've got a pure knight against bishop position. This is still not easy, and Pragg does exactly the right thing, exchanging as many pawns as possible. And king e4. But here, straight away, I think Pragg makes a mistake, or at least you could say he makes things a lot easier for Carlsen. I think he has to wait with the king. And yeah, just come back again if necessary. Instead he played knight b8. That's definitely a mistake. Because now king d4. If the king manages to enter here, then white is just winning. So Pragg played knight d7 to block the king out, but the knight is now passively placed. And this position is Zugzwang. Zugzwang! Yes, that wonderful German word. Zugzwang means that basically however black plays involves a compromise. You're forced to weaken your position. So if the king goes back, then king d5 and the king will come in here. And if the knight moves, then the king can possibly come in here. So knight b6. Well, the king doesn't come in straight away, of course, because there's a check. But b3. And yeah, if the knight had retreated, then, well, now, let me see. You know, white can wait with bishop a3. And again, it's a Zugzwang position. Black has to compromise. In that case, knight b6 would allow the king in. And a5, well, that would weaken the pawns terribly. So anyway, knight d5 played. Bishop came back as it was attacked. Okay, watch out, still got to be careful. King c5 would allow knight e4. So e4, well, this just pushes the pieces back. And Carlsen manages to establish the bishop on d6, and that controls key squares as well. So with these protected, then the king finally is able to enter the position. Pragg tries b4. I'm afraid this is insufficient. He manages to grab one of these pawns. And king a4 is an excellent move. Now Carlsen goes around in circles for a bit. He gets there in the end. I mean, there's no harm in repeating the position. And here, he's got exactly the right position, actually, with the king in a worse position. And now he can take this. So the point is, if king takes pawn, then the bishop comes back here, the knight is trapped, and that's the end of the game. Or, of course, knight takes, and this is completely winning. So now Carlsen is 2 pawns up, and the pawn can just basically roll home. And here, Praggnanandhaa resigned. Of course, this one is going through. So game 3, Carlsen got there in the end, but this was not an easy one. I mean, I think this showed Carlsen's extreme determination in making something of this. You know, this is kind of classic Carlsen. Pragg defended very well up to a point, but he'd done so well up to, let me see, the position with f5. Let me get to it. Yeah, up to here, Pragg defended extremely well, and instead of f5, which gave Carlsen a chance, rook a1, rook d1, with potentially the idea of rook a1, should have been fine for him. But Carlsen got him in the end. So that victory in game 3 meant that Carlsen was guaranteed at least to draw their 4-game match, which meant that Carlsen won the tournament. Now, could Pragg actually make it back to 2-2? If so, then he would get into a tiebreak. There's much more from this match to tell. I'll show you in another video what happened next.